Good afternoon. Welcome to Trail Talk. I'm so glad you could join us this afternoon. We're here live in Duncan, Oklahoma at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center. And this is a dear friend of the Heritage Center with me, Jay Snider, longtime supporter and friend of this place. We love it.
Well, I love it too.
Yeah.
It's always good to come to Duncan, to the Chisholm Trail Museum. We
Mhm.
always have a good time when we come down here, so I'm excited.
It's a fun place to hang out.
It is.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I tell people all the time, I have the best job in the world. I get to work at the coolest place. And if you guys have seen Jay and on Trail Talk before, that's because this is probably his, I don't know, fourth time or something to be on. He's so good to say yes when I ask him, and I appreciate it so much. But Jay and I have been friends for a long time. As long as I've known you, you've lived what, quarter of a mile from my mom and dad. So we're from the same hometown and been neighbors for a long time. But I asked Jay to be on Trail Talk today because he is currently serving for its 2023 and 2024, right?
Yes, ma'am.
As Oklahoma State Poet Laureate. And he was telling me earlier, I didn't realize that it was like in our state, whatever constitution or bylaws or whatever, that we are to have a poet laureate.
Yes, ma'am. It's mandated
Okay,
that the state of Oklahoma has a poet laureate.
very good.
I was honored, really honored to have even been considered for the position, and I'm hoping to carry on the traditions that the other poet laureates have, and so I'm excited about it.
Right. So, wow. I mean, I don't know when that mandate was put into place, but Oklahoma's been a state for 116 years next month. So could potentially be a very large number.
About the time I was born, I think.
Is that right?
Yeah, about the time I was born is
It was when they,
the state of became a state.
he's looking pretty good for 116, isn't he, y'all? So the process then, this was not something that you sought out.
No,
This was someone encouraged you, or essentially
yes,
gave
ma'am.
you a push to.
I was contacted by the Arts Council, which
Okay.
handles the poet laureate designation, or
Mhm.
would I be interested in assuming that position? And I thought, I don't know that I'm poet laureate material, but I was excited that they even knew that I existed.
Mhm.
I've been doing this a long time, and I did it because of the love of the stories. And I still do every day. I mean, that's part of what I try to do is keep the old stories alive and the poetry alive and their traditions. And we talked earlier, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist when it comes to poetry, and that's cowboy poetry. And traditionally, that cowboy poetry is rhymed and metered poetry. And so that's what I try to do. And maybe I need to veer off and do some other things, but
Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean,
that's kind of the way I look at it too, but I try to be as traditional as I can with what I write, and so that's kind of where I'm at as far as the poetry is concerned, and that's not to say that any other kind of poetry is not good, because it is. I've read a lot of different kinds of poetry, not rhymed and metered poetry, but different kinds of free verse poetry, and creative writing
mhm.
falls in that category as far as I'm concerned, and it's all good.
Mhm.
It's just that I'm more of a traditionalist, so that's what I try to do, but.
You mentioned Wallace Moore earlier, and we'll talk about that again in a minute, but he is more of that, his or less, he considers himself a cowboy poet, but his stories are not so much the rhyme and meter, you know, whenever he does something that's a little more, it's a little less portraying a character and a little more of a poem kind of thing. It's not as hard and fast, yeah, as structured.
And I get that, and that's okay, because he's telling a story, and his facts need to be spot on, and Wallace does a fabulous job of telling these stories, and the use of poetry in the stories is phenomenal. He does a wonderful job, and the best storyteller, as far as I'm concerned, ever.
Right, yeah, he's great. But that, I mean, I think I was really just pointing that out, that everyone has their own style and the things that appeal to them the most, and the way their thoughts process and come out in the creative writing thing that they put together. And so, you know, there's different styles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because you don't, or I don't, and I know he doesn't. Most anybody that writes any kind of poetry does not want to lose the integrity of the story or the thought or whatever it is they're writing about, simply for the sake of rhyme.
Yeah.
So, it's okay. You know, I just feel like that those stories need to be kept intact, and Wallace portrays, you know, the black cowboy and the black outlaw and the black.
The cook and the
And
soldier, the buffalo soldier.
yeah,
He's got a ton of those.
so you can't, I don't want to lose the integrity of the story simply for the sake of rhyme. So
right.
I mean, some of his stories are way long, so it takes a while.
This is
to do
true.
that, and it'd be hard to put it all in rhymed and metered poetry. So.
That would make that very difficult. So, when they talked to you about, well, you applied and then you found out they selected you, Governor Stitt wanted you to be the poet laureate. What did that laureate, not cowboy poet, but poet laureate, what did that mean in your mind initially?
Well, that puts it in a completely different thought process, because you know, when you take away the cowboy poet and just have the laureate, then that's a whole different thing, because there's so many good writers out there and poets, and using whatever style of poetry they decide to use. So you know, I was absolutely honored to have been considered, and possibly it's because I've been doing it a long time.
Oh, I'm sure. And I think you told me that someone said if you type in cowboy poet, your name pops up. That's really not an exaggeration. If I type in Jay Snider, there's probably 100 pictures of you. Some of them are the same, just a different, but each one, that means that your likeness has been put online for something for each one of those pictures. And so there is a lot of notoriety because of the career that you have had in cowboy poetry.
It's been such a wonderful opportunity for me, even doing it as long as I've done it. The opportunities have been endless, because of not simply because I go and do poetry, it's because I get to meet people different people from different walks of life, from different areas, and, you know, even the cowboys, you know, and in the far northwest or in Canada, they do things a little different than we
Right.
do down here. So it's been fascinating to learn the different ways that we as cowboys do things,
Mhm.
even though it's basically the same.
Right.
We do it a little different, and that's been fascinating, but in reality, that getting to meet the people
Mhm.
and visit with people from different walks of life and has been the greatest payment I could ever have. It's been fascinating.
And so as a poet laureate, you said that they want you to do like at least 5 events of some sort. There are stipulations to those events, but they want you to do 5 things a year that fit into the parameters
Yes, ma'am.
set up by the Oklahoma Arts Council.
Yes.
But 5 events a year, I mean, on average, how many different events would you say you had attended over the years?
Well, in the
Just maybe an average per year.
I'll do generally 40, 50 dates a year, you know, different gatherings, and they may be 2 or 3 day deals or,
Mhm.
you know, Stockman Association, gatherings or just different things that I've done. I'll do 30, 40, 50 dates a year and all over the country, to tell you the truth.
Right.
You know, been from Kamloops, British Columbia to Foley, Alabama, and all points in between, and it's just been a great thing, because you meet people, and I got to tell you right now, the gatherings that I have done and continue to do, those audiences are well educated on cowboy poetry now. You can't, there's not a way to fool them very easily. So that's why I really try hard to write tradition
Yes.
because of that. So
Yeah. There's probably a bit of an expectation when you know, the audience who is there, they've chosen to be at a cowboy poetry event.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
they know what they're wanting to hear.
Well, you know, the way I look at it, I'd be really hard pressed to write a poem about figure skating. And people realize that I knew what I was talking about.
Right.
Now, that's not to say I couldn't
Right.
if I studied it enough and watched it and researched figure skating, maybe I could put a poem together about figure skating. But
Right.
a friend of mine told me a long time ago, write about what you know and write the way you talk. And you don't have to fool anybody that way. And so that's kind of what I try to do. And I encourage people to learn Okie so that they'll understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
You don't have to have a translator.
No.
So do you remember the very first time you stood up and
Right here in Duncan, Oklahoma,
is that right?
the year that the museum opened. We had Chuck Wagon gathering out here. And that was the very first time, and I thought, man, what am I doing here? You know?
Is there a really big crowd of people?
Well, there was a pretty good crowd,
Uh-huh.
and I thought, I'm not a cowboy poet. I'd be better off out there in the audience watching somebody else, but it, you know, it worked out okay. And
Seems
After
like you did all right.
after I got off away from the stage fright part of the deal,
Yeah,
you know, it worked out okay. And I've been a lot of places since then, and I've come back here several times, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. And every place you go, is phenomenal, because you get to meet different people. And I did a presentation at a museum in Altus back in April, and at the museum and at the library and at the Rotary Club the day before. And it's fascinating to get to talk to people that kind of, that they know what you're talking about. Now, they may not have lived all of it,
Right.
but they at least know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And so it's been such a fun deal. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Well, some of the beauty of cowboy poetry to me is, you said this earlier, it is it's kind of a time capsule.
Absolutely.
You know, it holds the history of the cowboy life, which is just such a huge part. Cowboys are so iconic in relating to the United States. I've talked about this when we've had kids here. When people come from Europe or some place like that, another country to the US, something they almost always want to buy are cowboy boots.
Absolutely.
It's just a thing that people connect with the US. And so to keep it from being just this romanticized white cowboy hat, I'm going to rescue the maiden in distress thing, you know, that of course the cowboy is seen as a hero, but he was a hard working man who wanted to be outside on a horse doing the things that he loved and the things that he was good at.
Absolutely.
And so that's the thing I love about the cowboy poetry and that part of it.
And you can ask those same people from overseas, Germany, wherever,
Mhm.
that are visiting, and you can ask them to draw you a figure of an American, and they'll draw you a stick figure and put a cowboy hat on. And
Yep.
so they love it.
Uh-huh.
They love it. I've got a really, really dear friend in Maryland that if he walked in the door, I probably wouldn't know him, but we've been friends for 20 years or better on the phone.
Mm.
And he's surrounded by civil war out where he's at,
Mhm.
but he loves the cowboy and the cowboy way of life. And we'll talk on the phone, you know, 2 or 3 times, 3 or 4 times a month, just visiting. And he has been in love with the cowboy and the cowboy way of life for all those many years. And so he got in touch with me. Well, I did a TV deal called Christmas in Cowboy Country back 20 or better years ago, and Clint Black hosted it. And anyway, I did a poem, and how he got a hold of me, I have no idea but he called me on the phone, and we visited for a long time about the deal. And from that day forward, we've been the best of friends. And so I get excited about those kind of things.
Right, where people just have that desire to learn more and know more about Western life, cowboy life. You know, I think sometimes in Oklahoma, you might just take it for granted. You know, if you live in a rural community, especially, yeah, there's a rodeo every August. You know, we're going to go watch a rodeo. Yeah, your folks have cattle on 2 or 3 places. They lease some land. You got to go work the cows. I mean, there's just so many things like that for me anyway, I just took it for granted that was a way of life, and not that it was anything very special or unique,
Right.
You know, until much later
Right.
in my life.
And, luckily we've been around that way of life our whole lives. So we do take it for granted, but you get the folks in the cities that aren't around that kind of lifestyle. They may or may not know what you're talking about, but we try to, or I try to, as a poet, cowboy poet, I try to pass those values and those stories and the way of life that the cowboys led back in the days, and it really started back in the cattle drive days. That's where the majority of it started, and it came right up through where we're sitting,
Exactly.
and into Indian territory, and you're moving 2,500, 3,000 head of cattle up those trails, the Chisholm Trail, the Western Trail, and you got 10 or 12 young guys, basically 13 to 17 years old, moving those cattle without a bridge, without a road, without a fence. Depending on where you started and where you went, 600 to 1,000 miles. And it fascinates me to read about it and see some of the hardships that those young guys went through, and some of them made it and some of them didn't, and some of them made it more than once. So it's always been fascinating to me to read those stories and try to keep those, those values alive.
Right. The people trails, the Oregon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, we learned about those at school. Because I guess because there was moving people and showing how people settled the country. But I don't remember learning about the cattle drives in school and the significance of those trails in Oklahoma. And so I love the thought that this is an enrichment into someone's life, or if you get to talk to students,
Right.
that's enriching their knowledge of not just the poetry itself, which is an art form, but also the history that inspires that art form. And I just think that is.
Well, we're in a unique area, you get out of central United States where the cattle drives weren't prevalent. And so it's a whole different way of life, and people do what they have to do to make a living, and if you're not in the cattle industry or whatever, you have to learn how to be a lumberjack or something to that effect. But we're blessed to have the history that we have, as far as I'm concerned,
Right.
of the cowboy and how he got his start, and he's still here.
For sure.
There's so many things that the cowboy does that you can't do with a computer. You can't go doctor a sick calf with a computer.
Yeah.
You got to go horseback and rope him and lay him down and doctor him. And so there's some things that we still do that have been done for 150 years or better.
Right. And Mike Anderson was here yesterday talking about let me think, the name of it's like this song, the Prairie Circuit
Ram
Finals, whatever that whole long word name is, got like 7 words in it, but it's this weekend. And he has the Living Legends thing and they're hosting it here on tomorrow. But anyway, and he was talking about, because I thought, how do you choose the living legend? And he was talking about, well, there are the horse trainers. They pick horse trainers or saddle makers or, all these people that do all these things behind the scenes. And the cowboy life, it's not just performing in rodeos. You still have to have saddles and hats and boots and bridles and ropes, and there's so many other parts of the life that's still an industry.
Tools of the trade.
Exactly. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and that all those people kind of perpetuate that or assist in perpetuating that
Sure.
cowboy life that,
Absolutely.
you know, it's a great history to study for sure.
Yeah. It's, like I say, we're unique. You know, Texas, they started down there
Mhm.
moving cattle and after the Civil War. And Joseph McCoy had the idea, let's take them to Kansas where the railroads are. So that's what they did.
Yeah,
And they ended up on the Chisholm Trail and the Western Trail. And
you know, it's funny. I mean, you don't hear about him like having to really convince people. He didn't have to go on Shark Tank and say, now I've got this idea, you know, and give all this big. It was just the right idea at just the right time. Everyone saw how brilliant that was.
absolutely.
And then there are all these young men with no place to work after the war was over, trying to, you know, situate their lives and stuff. And it was all perfect timing, really, I
Yeah,
guess.
and you know, those young guys that hired on to those outfits probably weren't cowboys at the time they hired on.
Mhm.
They were young men looking for work.
Yeah,
But I can nearly guarantee you that by the time they left San Antonio, that herd and got to Kansas, they were pretty good cowboys. They had to be
they had to be, yeah,
to survive.
yeah.
So, crossing rivers, doing the things that they had to do to get there.
I know Lonesome Dove is a movie, but if you read that book, because the book is so big, there's no way you could put all of the things that happened, but you know, all the things that they experienced on that drive was just, I mean, it was just amazing. Like you say, crossing the river, you know, there were the guys from Ireland and there's snakes in the river and, you know, just, I mean, I don't know. It's, yeah, people that's entertainment when you watch the movie or read the book or whatever, but it's probably all based on real life events.
Oh,
None of that was sensationalized
No.
just for the story. There were all of those things, stampedes and, you know, all of those things had to have happened.
it all happened. Sure it did, you know, and I look back and I know I'm not tough enough to have done it. You know, it was an amazing feat
Mhm.
to get that herd where it needed to be and I don't know how they did it.
I know.
The perseverance.
Yeah, I guess we are a little soft these days as we're sitting here in our air conditioned room. You know, in our cushioned chairs
In
and
front of the computer.
in front of a computer, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, so what would you say is something that, given this platform, the Poet Laureate, what is the thing that you would want to be able to leave behind or take advantage of having this distinction at this time? You know, how would you want to use this? Because I think that's an opportunity that you really have.
I think educating people, kids of not necessarily cowboy poetry so much. It's about writing skills, creative writing skill, use of the English language, communication skill is really important to me because, and I've done a lot of schools in the past. And I try really hard to promote communication skill because without it, at some point in your life, you're going to have to communicate with the guy that might hire you.
Mhm.
So I want those kids, my grandkids, I want them to have not only education, I want them to have communication skill. Because it's very, very important, you know, a lot of that stuff, you know, you can Google whatever you want to Google.
Right.
but you, at some point, you're gonna have to relay that to somebody. You need to have enough communication skills that you can tell somebody about it without getting on your phone or getting on a computer. You want to be able to relay that to individuals. So,
That's a really, I love that. I think that's so great because, I mean, that is the basis plus it's important in your art form. You know, you only have people's attention for so long, especially with the meter, to me, without losing someone, and for you to be able to tell that story, your communication skills have to be pretty polished.
Sure, and I think that poetry is important because you can tell a story, you can write a story, you can tell a story and tell it to the next guy. Well, probably he's going to embellish that just a little bit. So by the time it gets 10 people away from you, then the whole story's changed. But with the poetry, if you put it in a rhyme scheme and meter, then the story, it stays the same.
Stays the same. That is
because of the meter and because of the rhyme scheme. So
I love that.
There's nothing wrong with changing the stories, but
Right.
first thing you know, they're not true stories anymore. So I think that's a lot of the reason that I enjoy writing the poetry is because well, it's easier to remember.
Yes.
For one thing, if I can put it in a rhyme scheme and with meter, it's easier for me to remember. Where a story, maybe I can't remember all the parts of it, but with rhyme and meter, first thing you know, you thought, oh, I missed something there.
Right.
So, but you have to, and I do that quite often, but the story stays the same pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's part of what I enjoy about the poetry is I can write it down and keep it intact and relay it to somebody that doesn't know, and it's still the same story. And so that's what I try to do.
Are there many up and coming, like young cowboy poets? Is this an art form that's kind of dwindling?
No, well, we need more,
Right.
but there are several young folks coming up that are very good, and they're honing their skills, and whether it's in the poetry or the music or whatever they're doing, there's some young folks coming up. Now, we would like to have more.
Right.
But there's, it's not going to be a lost form. I don't think. That's great. There's some kids coming up that are really doing a fantastic job, and different areas of the country. There's some young guys.
I mean, I guess that doesn't necessarily like age. You said you've been doing this for 20 years, but it's not like you were a teenager when you started doing cowboy poetry. They're probably, I think George Rhodes, he was maybe had retired from his job. I think he was a teacher before he started really writing and publishing poetry. So, I mean, it is that kind of a way of expressing yourself but I always am interested in if this is something that is being passed down and if it's being received. Sometimes the interest of younger people, it's more into a technology or something like that. And so.
Yeah, there's a lot of young kids that are trying to keep the art form alive, but they have to learn it from somebody.
Yes.
And most of the time they're learning it from, older folks or parents or grandparents or whatever. And I I read a lot of different poets, sort of old traditional poets, Bruce Kiskadness, Omar Barker, and some of those old timers that wrote a lot of poetry. And the reason I like it so well is because those guys lived what they wrote about, and there's a vernacular that those guys use that we don't use so much anymore. And so it dates it a good ways in the past, but they were good at what they did. And so there's so much classic poetry out there now that I love to read, simply because I'm trying to learn, what I need to do to make mine better.
Right.
And so I read a lot of classic poetry but for me anyway, inspiration, I have to have the inspiration to write something, and I've written some on feed sacks and napkins and different things, the thoughts anyway.
Yeah.
Because, if I drive a mile down the road and I don't write it down, I'm probably going to lose it somewhere. So
yeah.
the inspiration comes from every direction. And you have to be aware that it might come at any time. So I try to be aware that sounded like the start of a poem or the middle or the somewhere, that's a line that needs to be kept. And so I try to, and I've got a shoebox at home that is full of stuff.
Scraps.
And I'll go through there every now and then and read some of it, and I think, who wrote that? But at the time, I thought it was important that I write this down, and because I may use it at some point, but life gets in the way a lot of the times, and you don't have time to sit down and really delve into what you're trying to do. And so anyway, I try to be aware at all times of that inspiration may come at any time from any direction. So it's
have you always loved poetry? I mean, as a really young man, was that something?
No, I can't say that I really loved poetry. We didn't, when I was in school, we didn't get into the poetry much, but as I got older and I got involved with some of the people that were writing poetry, and then it interested me. And I've heard and witnessed so many stories, and I've heard so many stories from Dad and my granddad and different old cowboys that I thought, I need to see if I can at least try to write something.
Yeah, right.
And so I started writing some things down, and it wasn't by any means good. And so I started reading classic poetry, and I started reading other folks' poetry, and I got involved with, these poetry gatherings, and I watched people that I considered really good poets, and I listened to their poems, and I watched how they did things, and so hopefully I learned a little bit.
Right.
And it's been a blessing. It sure has. It sure has.
I wonder if teenage Jay would have ever pictured himself reading poetry.
Never. Never.
I love that though. I mean, that just goes to show you just don't ever know. You just don't ever know what kinds of new things are going to interest you at some other point in your life.
That's exactly right. That's why I really try to impress on young kids, communication skills, because that's what this is.
True.
Basically. Now, you don't have to put it in poetic form, but, if you've got a granddad, or if you've got folks, or you've got friends or acquaintances that have stories to tell,
Mhm.
at least write it down.
Mhm.
Write the thoughts down, maybe you'll make a poem out of it at some point, maybe you won't.
Right.
It's okay, just write it down, because like we talked earlier, when the old timers are gone, the stories are gone.
Mhm.
So for me, if I don't write it down, it's gonna be gone.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So are any of your grandkids interested?
Right now, I don't think so. Now, I know they've read some of my poetry and they've listened to some of it, but right now, I'm
You
not
don't-
sure that
No, no,
it
not
interests
right
them
now.
that much, but
Yeah,
maybe,
it's always an age thing.
sure.
I mean, it really is what a young person is going to be drawn to. Well,
Yeah.
just like teenage Jay would have never
Yeah.
imagined.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There was a time when the cowboy deal didn't really interest me, because I guess, well, by the time I was 12, I was pretty much road founder, because we was at a rodeo every weekend, and I thought, oh boy, here we go again. We get to go to the rodeo,
Yeah,
but as time went on, then that became part of who I am. So,
true. So, next week, you're going to be over in Lawton with part of a conference that Oklahoma Humanities,
Oklahoma Arts.
Oklahoma Arts Council, I apologize,
Conference
conference, the Oklahoma Arts Council
in
Conference.
Actually starts Tuesday, but it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Mhm.
and I'll be there Wednesday first at the luncheon.
Mhm.
We'll do a little poetry there at the luncheon, and then later on in the day, Wallace Moore and I are going to do a poetry writing session,
Mhm.
and I'm looking forward to that. I'm
Wow.
excited about that.
I would, yeah, that sounds like an amazing breakout session.
Wallace and I have been friends for a long time, and I could listen to him all day long.
Me
and-
too. Or
and-
just talking to him,
Yes,
boy, he's just a encyclopedia of knowledge.
so I'm excited about that, and I talked to him on the phone last night. And he's always excited about something.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
That'll be great.
and I'm excited to sit in on some of the other sessions and meet folks that are there as artists or writers or whatever art form they've chosen.
Mhm.
I'm excited to get to visit with some of those folks and learn what they do, and maybe they'll learn a little bit about what I do.
Right.
And I want to represent our state the best way I possibly can, as the poet laureate, and so I'm excited to get to participate in some of those functions like that.
Oh, for sure. Well, Jay, we are just downright proud
Well,
that you were selected for this. I think we would be remiss if we didn't hear at least one poem from you, if before we go.
I could probably do
You
that.
think you could,
Yeah.
twist your arm a little bit? You might
I
do
could
that.
probably do that, yeah.
Do you like to, you do them sitting down, or you wanna?
Oh, yeah.
sit? Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
okay.
fine.
Mary, you wanna take me out of the shot here a little bit, because I'm just gonna stare at him, so.
Well, I wrote this poem a long time ago, and I've done it several times in the past, but it's thoughts that I had, and it's another one of those things where you need to write it down, and hopefully it'll take shape at some point in your life. But it's called The Pearly Gate. Do you ever stop and wonder, is there just one pearly gate? In my mind's eye, I can see it there standing strong and true and straight. And the paint weren't chipped or faded, and it swung real smooth and free, but is this gate just for city folk, not for worn out old punchers like me? You see, I'm not accustomed to gates of grand around our ranch. We merely make do. They're not real neat and they're fancy made. Most got a broken rail or two. So I wonder, when I make it there to that gate so grand and fine, will the good Lord let me ride on through or send me round to one like mine? Like this one here at the Brandon Pens with its worn and splintered rails. Lord, if that old gate could talk, it could tell a million tales. Like at Brandon time when the wagon's out for weeks there in the spring, or when the hands play a cowboy symphony as their rowels begin to ring. Or in the winter when it's feeding time because the snow is drifting deep and you're wondering where the removie is, roll out because you can't sleep because that old gate ain't hung real sturdy. It blows shut when it ain't tied, so you brave the bitter snow and cold to push that gate back way out wide. And the horses know protection's waiting through that gate if there's a need, and there's trust and admiration there when they come in to feed. You see, that gate is mighty special, though it's seen some better days. In the spring, you see revival through it in the valley beneath the haze. And at that gate, if you listen closely, a wealth of laughter fills your ears. Must be old friends that happened by for all those many years. Because this ranch breathed life for a lot of years into kids and calves and foals, and sunrise still takes your breath away from atop those rocky knolls. So this gate must be the pearly kind, though it's rough and loosely tied. Because when I'm standing there looking through, I see heaven on the other side. There you go. Thank you.
That's a very sweet poem. My goodness. That
Thank
would
you.
make you cry a little bit, huh?
Well, at times.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for choosing that one
You
to
bet.
share with us.
You bet.
And I really meant what I said. I might have said it kind of funny, but we really are very proud that the governor selected you for this honor, and that you are Oklahoma State Poet Laureate, and that you get to do things for a couple of years with that distinction, and hopefully influence and teach some of the students in our state. And I just can't think of a better guy or a better thing for you to be doing.
Well, I appreciate it. And I that's my goal, is I want to try to educate and I want to try to teach a little bit. I want to try to push this forward and get those kids thinking about, you know, what needs to be written down, what needs to be passed forward. So that's my goal anyway.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling you're going to do it very well.
Well, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, for those of us who don't get to go to that conference next week, we're going to be missing out on time with Jay, but you guys seriously look him up, because there are still many other events that you are going to be participating in.
I'm hoping to, I really am.
Yeah. So I think you said you're going to be up in Claremore in November. Is that right?
In November, I've got a school to do in Oklahoma City in December. I've got a presentation in Ardmore next year in January, I believe it is. January or February, but I'm excited about it. I'm gonna get to meet some new folks and hopefully pass this art form on.
I think you're a great representative for that, to make that happen. So guys, thank you so much for watching and for sharing this time with me and our friend Jay Snider. And if you see him around, be sure you shake his hand and tell him he's doing a great job. And we'll see you guys next week. It's time to say happy trails.
Good.
We'll see y'all then. Happy trails.
Trail.